The Isle in the Silver Sea, Chapter 2. Vina. It was love, love for queen and country that brought the sword to his hands, and made him lay it against his love's lily-white breast. Love, that made him pierce her through. There's no greater love, my brothers, than the one we have for this green and blessed land. Source: Parliamentary Speech of MP Edward Morgan. Archivists ruling, preserve, publication permitted, no further action required. When Vina was 10 years old, she was examined by a scribe in her father's study. The fire was crackling in the stone hearth. Her father's hunting dog lay asleep on the rug in front of it. Snoring volubly, she stared down at her own feet, lifting and lowering her toes in her new brown brogues, the ones she'd begged for, because she'd seen their thick golden buckles in the atelier's window and fallen in love with them. Up down, she was already starting to crease the leather. She had not even had the chance to wear them outside yet. I should never have told anyone about the man crying in the orangery, Vina thought, aggrieved. He'd been weeping a name over and over again. Isadora, Isadora. Vina had thought he was a burglar, or mad, or maybe both, and looking at him had made her feel as if she were floating outside her body. So she had run for help. But when she and the servants had returned, the man had been gone. Through the crackle of flame and the dog's snores, she could hear the clink of the scribe's tools: ink, needle, compass. The scribe coughed and turned, his robes rustling around him. Her father had assured her he was no back-alley-skinned scribbler, although she hadn't understood what that meant. This was a scribe from one of the best streets in Mayfair. He would look after her. Miss Lavinia, he said. May I? She raised her head. His eyes were very blue, set in a wrinkled face. He smiled like a doctor, impersonal and kind. I don't know what you want me to do, she said. Give him your hand, Vinny, said her father. His voice boomed from behind his desk, where he sat in his large armchair. His forehead was pressed against his palm. Vina held out her hand. The scribe was an enormously tall man, and he loomed over as he leaned down and took her hand in his own. He held the needle aloft. Do you know what this is? Vina shook her head. Limney ink, he said. The most precious of all inks, my dear, ground from stone, touched by the first incarnates, mined from the bowels of the Isle, quite precious indeed, and quite finite. This bottle was taken from beneath the cavern of a witch, he told her, as he wetted his needle. The ink gathered on it like black pearls, or like the caviar the cooks served at her father's dinner parties. With this, normal ladies and gentlemen, like yourself, and I, may gain the magic of a story for a price. With a light hand, he traced the needle in a swirl against her wrist. She tensed, expecting pain, but the needle moved so lightly it didn't cut her skin. It only left a tracery of ink behind it. The ink was in the shape of music, little flourishing notes like the ones on the book kept on the grand piano in the library. If you're a normal little girl, this will make you sing like an angel, the scribe said. Of course, your voice will shrivel in your old age, and take your breath with it, but such is the price of the gift of a story, my dear, it gives and it takes. Vina had no chance to protest. There was a sharp pain, as if a dozen needles were sliding into her skin at once. But there was only the one, driving hard into her wrist. It went in clean and oddly bloodless, as if the needle were passing through her and turning to smoke. The ink around it pulsed, shining like starlight, then abruptly dulled. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. Vina felt a chime in her skull, a bell ringing between her ears. Then her hand began to burn again, the pain so sharp she couldn't even scream. The ink glowed hotter and hotter, rising out of her skin. It slithered to the floor like a ribbon, and went still. The scribe leaned down and scooped it up in an empty vial. The tale didn't take, the scribe said, as if that meant something. Congratulations. Her father gave a low groan. Oh hell. Chin up, the scribe said to her father, slipping his vial of ink back into his pocket. Your seat in Parliament's assured. Whoa, I wouldn't be sure. Once the papers start digging, her father muttered. He looked red and his face was damp with sweat. Laura's going to murder me. Laura was her father's wife. She'd always been nice enough to Vina, but Vina supposed there was probably a big difference between having your husband's bastard in your house, and the papers gossiping about said bastard. And they would, when they knew what the scribe thought Vina was. An incarnate child is a blessing, and an honor, the scribe said, reproof in his voice. Of course, her father agreed hastily. But I had no reason to ever believe. That is, I thought the night was meant to be. Her father's voice trailed off. But silence could have words in it too. Vina looked down at her own hands. They were as brown as her mother's had been. Yes, the scribe said simply, but there can be no doubt, I am afraid. Miss Lavinia is the knight who will slay the witch. It took 2 hours for the others to free Vina from the witch's trap. Use a knife, Vina said, when they began. We tried the knife already, Matthias protested, as he rooted through his destrier's pack, sweaty, and cursing under his breath as he drew out one talisman, then another. It's like getting a blade into the hinge of an oyster, she said helpfully, as Edmund dropped his sword, and started waving iron and silver coins and crosses at the toadstool ring instead. You just need to get the angle right. They ignored her. She couldn't be angry about it, particularly, blaming the lads for being useless, was like blaming water for being wet. We shouldn't have let you come, Edmund said, kneeling beside her and flicking a silver coin between his fingers. He was frowning. If we hadn't felt sorry for you, I know, she sighed. I'm nothing but trouble. Stick the knife into the toadstool to the left just to humor me, After a good hour more of cajoling, Edmund finally tried it. Now Edmund and Matthias clambered onto the barge waiting for them at the edge of the Thames, sullenly untying the rope holding it against the bank, and lighting the barge's torches. Vina tied up their destriers, then stood on the bank, and met her own reflection in the water. Idly, she watched the way the water rippled, pushing her eyes, and her mouth and her chin, out of shape as the stomping of her fellow knights sent the water sloshing. Edmund tripped lighting the last torch. He found his feet before he tipped overboard, which was a good thing. She wouldn't have wanted to watch him try to swim in full armor. You're an idiot, Vina. You know that? Edmund burst out. Wah, she said. Eddie, you wound me. You truly do. Edmund gave an exasperated harumph. Fuck off, he said. He'd worked himself into a real lather. The knife incident must have really hurt his pride. You had to flirt with the thief, didn't you? Had to show off, and try, and get into her knickers. And look where we are now. If the queen decides we need our heads lopped off, it's your fault. She's not going to touch my head, Vina said. I think we'll all be fine. Why? Have you seduced her too? God's blood. You sleep with a man's sister once, and he'll truly never forgive you. She's an incarnate, Matthias said. He sounded thoroughly fed up. Under his helm, she could see the twist of his mouth, the red of his cropped beard. She's got to live to play her role. If it comes to it, I'll tell the queen that I vowed to live, and die with you, or some rot like that, Vina said, grinning at Edmund, who scowled back. She'll have to let you live then. No need to fear for your precious neck any longer, Eddie. Whoa, shut up, said Edmund. Get on here, Lavinia, Matthias ordered, knocking his shoulder softly against Edmund's. Peace. The sooner we get the ink to the archives, the sooner we can go home. She climbed onto the barge. As soon as she was on board, the torches flickered, shivering from gold to the white and rose of the queen's heraldry. The barge lurched, then began to move through the water on its own. The mirror-bright surface of the Thames, splitting around it like pearls of mercury. The city loomed around them in ripples of thatched roofs and smog-stained slate, white colonnades and stained glass windows. Usually Vina loved seeing the city like this, but tonight she wasn't herself. She touched her gloved fingers to the satchel at her side. It didn't feel lighter, but she knew the witch had reached into it and stolen the ink she desired. Maybe she'd only taken a single vial. That was all she'd asked for. Vina hadn't told the others any ink had been stolen. If there was trouble at the archives over it, Vina would take responsibility. No one expected any better of her anyway. A sense memory stole over her, the brush of the witch's breath, her eyes, flatly furious under her own snapping firelight. Maybe she hadn't been the witch. If Vina kept telling herself that, perhaps she'd soon believe it. Maybe the woman under that hood had been nothing more than a thief with a few enchantments to her name, and fire in her fingertips. Maybe she'd paid a scribe to mark her up with limney ink to get all the magic she had. Maybe, but the air had tasted like an old penny, rusty, bloody. And when Vina had met her eyes, she'd seen the weeping man in the orangery so clearly that it had been as if she were 10 years old again. Watching him bow his head between his hands, his golden hair soaked to copper by blood, howling like a wounded animal. She'd felt a loose knot in her chest abruptly draw tight, stealing her breath. Her tail had trapped her like a noose. Isadora, my love, my darling, not again, no. The barge jerked. She heard Edmund curse again, then settle back into silence. She was sure he and Matthias hadn't heard her call the thief Isadora. Somehow, by luck or whatever trickery tales like to pull, they hadn't heard the wretchedness in Vina's voice. They didn't know her tale would soon begin, which meant they didn't pity her. She set a hand on the edge of the barge. She was amazed at how still her hand was. She wasn't trembling at all. The tower soon loomed above them. Even in the shadows and torchlight of the night she could see the ravens circling overhead, their wings spread. The air seemed to grow colder as they grew closer to the gates that surrounded it. Tail scent filled the air, iron and ink, blood and apples alike. She inhaled, and the smell of the queen's archives filled her lungs. As an incarnate, Vina had learned long ago that her purpose was to live out her tale. To embody the tale is to keep it alive, her stepmother Laura had told her gently. When Vina had first learned what she was, she'd pressed incarnate tales for children into Vina's hands. Vina remembered, even now, the red leather of its binding, sticky from the sweat of her own hands, as she'd clutched it tight. Your value is beyond measure, but tales need more than incarnates to live, darling. They need to be read. A tale read is a tale that can feast, nestling in your mind, and growing strong. Read wisely, dear Lavinia. Keep the tales steadfast in your heart. Vina had kept that book with her when she'd been led away to her new life, and in the royal palace, alongside her fellow knights, she'd learned that a tale told wrong was a capital crime. Changing tales, altering them, penning heresies, risked destroying the tales entirely, and the Isle with them. To protect the Isle, the Queen's archivists maintained and preserved all canonical texts inside the tower's walls. Every single book and news sheet published across the Isle also passed under their careful eyes before reaching people's hands. She knew that the quiet, pervasive power of the archivists was necessary, but as she gazed up at the circling ravens, and the Queen's rose flag, dun and dark in the night smog, she was grimly reminded that the tower was not only an archive, but a prison. Death lingered in its foundations. When Vina had heard from Edmund's sweet, gossipy sister, that he and Matthias had been given a plum quest to carry Limni ink to the tower in the dead of night, well, she was hardly going to let them stumble into trouble alone. She'd always had a good nose for danger, and the archives reeked of stories and danger alike. In her experience, they often went hand in hand. Their barge led them to the Trader's Gate, that arch of stone rising from the river. It opened at their approach with a clank and a groan. The silver water rippled around their barge as it swept beneath the darkness of the gate's arch. Beyond it, waiting on the steps, was an archivist, cowl pulled up so only her chin and the long gray braid of her hair was visible. Above her, on the walls of the bloody tower, perched a watchful line of ravens who cocked their heads in something like greeting. "You're late," said the archivist. "Entirely my fault," Vina said, jumping lightly onto the stone steps that awaited them. She bowed, then straightened. "I'm afraid we got a little caught up." She smiled. The archivist did not smile back. "Come with me," the archivist replied dourly, and turned. "Quickly, Sir Knights." They followed her swiftly up the stairs and across the grounds of the tower, beyond the bloody tower and Wakefield Tower alike, through the inner fortifications. Gray and imposing defensive walls guarded by yeoman warders in their starched liveries, their faces wan and blank. Distantly, Vina could hear sobbing, high and childish, the screams and wails of the tower's long-dead prisoners, no doubt. Matthias murmured a soft prayer under his breath. Vina, who never prayed, started humming. It took Matthias a full minute to realize what she was humming, and half a second longer to kick her in the ankle. "You can't sing bawdy songs here," he hissed. "It's good I wasn't saying the words then, isn't it?" Vina replied, and resumed her efforts to psychologically torture her fellow knights with another round of the Miller's song. New ghostly cries filled the air as they entered the grandest edifice on the tower's grounds. The White Tower, as pale as its name, glowed coldly in the dark. Vina finally let her voice fade in her throat as they clambered up its many stairs, passing grim warders with their hands on their sword hilts. "Ignore the noises," the archivist said, as ghostly wails rose up from the basement and clamored in Vina's ears. "The ghosts are bound with chains of Limni ink. They can't cause us any harm." They followed her up a narrow staircase. The higher they climbed, the more the wailing faded, and the more new sound welled up in its place, shouting, running, bangs. As they reached the third narrow landing, an archivist slammed open the door ahead of them, the wood bouncing against stone. "You have the ink?" the man snapped. "Yes? Well, come here and hand it to me." Matthias shoved Vina's shoulder, and she strode up the stairs, taking off the satchel and handing it to the archivist. It was snatched without thanks, and the man ran back into the room. The woman who had guided them up lowered her hood, revealing a tense, exhausted face, mouth wrinkled with lines of deep tension. She strode in after him. Vina, Matthias, and Edmund exchanged looks. The archivist had not told them to follow, but she also hadn't ordered them not to. They were knights, so they did what came naturally, and followed her into the fray. Matthias and Edmund drew their swords with a high-pitched whine of steel. Vina kept her own sheathed. She couldn't imagine what use a sword would be against books. Vina was closest to the door, so she was the first to feel the gut punch of a tail. It slammed into her, through her, her mouth filled with the taste of hot pennies, and her ears filled with a buzzing, a low howl like a horde of bees, or a roaring sea, a tide of tail spinning, rising, and clawing at the walls of stone and mortal flesh to force its way free. It held her frozen as Matthias and Edmund bullied their way farther into the room, leaving her by the door. The air was howling, a tempest of wind whipping against the circular flagstone walls. Despite its ferocity, the torches hadn't guttered out. Instead they were huge wild discs of light wheeling in their sconces, billowing with the yells of the 5 archivists inside the chamber. They were standing in a crescent, their cowls flying behind their skulls, their eyes narrowed against the storm. Each of the 5 archivists around them now held a vial of Limni ink, empty vials scattered at their feet, and ribbons of ink were spinning through the air, converging on the circular table at the center of the room. With their voices and their hands, they were controlling the ink, but they were struggling to get it to obey them. Vina felt Limni ink whip through the air and splatter against her exposed chin, a burn, hotter than starlight. Then it fell inert against her armor with a hiss. What the shit? Edmund whispered fervently. Matthias drew his shield up, angling to stand in front of them both. Vina, grimly assured now that swords weren't going to do them much good, slammed the door properly shut with her booted foot and kept her heel against the wood for good measure. Whatever was flying around this room had no business leaving it. On the table, burning in fire that wasn't fire, in white flames that flickered in and out of existence like night terrors, lay a book. It was an old book, an illuminated text with rich, flowing script in diamonds of bloodred and ichor black. Its binding was leather, tooled with images of rowan berries and thorns. It was open at the center, the spine cracked, the pages torn into fissures like dry earth. As Vina watched, another page began to splinter, the ink crawling from it, leaching color from the page. More, an archivist ordered, and more Limni ink spooled across the page, pressing words and images back into place. More, damn you. There was a blast. The book tore. The sound of it was terrible, like a high scream and like flesh being pared. It did not sound like simple paper, easily mended. It sounded like death. Ink gathered together like a cudgel and slammed its way toward the door. Matthias squared his feet against the ground, bracing his shield for the blow. Vina, thinking fast, shoved herself flat against the door. If her one job was to keep whatever lay in that book from escaping, then she was going to do it. The ink hit them hard. This was not brief, star-sharp pain. It was all-consuming. Blackness swathed her vision, and against it she saw brief fragments of a story play out before her eyes. A Phi woman in winter, cold-aid, her heartless face lit by the brightness of new-fallen snow. A knight, kneeling at her feet, his face stricken and starved. She knew his face. Soren. Abruptly the ink, and the darkness, were gone. She blinked. Matthias was holding one of the archivists upright. Edmund was standing in front of her, trying to shake ink from his sword. You know, I don't think swords are meant to fight books, he muttered. It's not right. Small fragments of paper were flurrying through the air like snow. Vina caught one piece on her outstretched palm. It was blank. In her mind, something was gone too. A name on the tip of her tongue. A half-memory of something on a shoreline. Coastal mountains? A village? One of the archivists laughed bitterly, hands on their knees as they bent forward. What do you think we've lost this time? The white cliffs of Dover? The forest of Arden? Well, if you can remember their names, we'll discuss it later, another said. And Vina felt their eyes on her. 5 pairs of eyes, and a tail flickering in and out of focus behind her own. Vina, Edmund was saying, his voice low and alarmed. She felt Matthias's hand close around her arm. What's wrong, Vina? She'd slumped back against the door at some point. Terribly sorry, she said faintly, but I don't think I can stand. I'll take her, Sir Knight, said one archivist hurriedly. He was young. There was a crack in his glasses from the storm, and the torchlight reflected strangely on it, turning one of his brown eyes into a starburst. He gave Vina a concerned smile and grasped her by the shoulders. Come with me, he said gently. Let's get you sat down. He led her out of the room. He guided her carefully to the ground, letting her tip her head back. How do you feel, Sir Knight? Fit as a fiddle, she said. Just let me catch my breath. The ink disturbed you, the archivist murmured, brow creased. Harmed you, I think. You're an incarnate. I am, Vina agreed absently, slumping into a heap. She was worried she was going to vomit. Fun. You were not summoned for this task, the archivist said, voice hushed. We would never have allowed an incarnate here. You're far too sensitive to the magic of books and ink. You shouldn't touch the ink, Sir Knight. It causes your kind pain. There's too much tail magic in you already. I came for a lark, she said weakly. More fool me. She sat up. Her armor felt heavier than it ever had before. What was that? Vina asked. That wildness? A tale dying, the archivist replied. He raised his hand from her shoulder, and pushed his glasses up. A thumbprint of ink was left on the bridge of his nose. You're Minister Morgan's daughter, he said. It was not a question, but archivists weren't questioners. They said how things were. Named them. A tale dying, Minister Morgan's daughter. But she nodded, and he nodded slowly in return, and said, I have a message for your father. Something private. Private? Intriguing. I'll be happy to pass it on. Tell him to add the tale of the merciless maiden to the list of the lost. And tell him he has a body to find. The body will have a circle carved into its forehead. That's how we'll know. The archivist swallowed. Either a Phi woman, he'll have to contact the lords, or a human man. An incarnate. His name, Soren, said Vina. Soren Aldershot Wilkins. He's the incarnate of the lovelorn knight. From the tale of the merciless maiden.
Ah.
Yes, I know him, said Vina helplessly.
Ah.
Then I am sorry. He patted her hand. I'm afraid he may be well. I'm sorry. Her head was spinning. She wished it weren't. She did not know Soren well, but she'd still been close to him in the way only known incarnates were. Once as teenagers after a ball they'd snuck away, and stolen the better part of a cask of cider, climbed on a roof, and shared secrets, apple drunk, dancing shoes kicked off, and sparkling under the moonlight. Soren had said, I avoid the countryside because I don't want to meet her, the Phi maiden who I'll die pining for. That bitch. The love of my life. It's foolish perhaps, but what incarnate hasn't resisted their fate? Vina, I shouldn't have told you any of this, the archivist said in a rush. But this can't be kept quiet any longer. Something has to be done. He rose to his feet, brushing the creases from his robes with trembling hands. Did someone kill Soren? Vina heard herself ask, as if from somewhere far away. Is someone killing incarnates? The door opened, and Matthias poked his head around the corner. Are you feeling better, Lavinia? Of all the bloody timing. Yes, said Vina lightly. Very much. She looked up at the archivist. He'd taken off his glasses and was rubbing them clean on his sleeve. Not looking at her. I'm glad to hear it, the archivist said, formal now. The Queen's archivists thank you for your service, fair knight. If you're feeling better, we'll happily escort you back to your barge, and see you on your way.